Hello, and welcome to the Revolutionology Podcast, the podcast for revolutionaries by revolutionaries. My name is Ben, and we normally have somebody else with us as well, my buddy Abak. He's not going to be here tonight. He had some stuff to take care of. We had something planned, but then I had a backup plan. I went and saw the movie Avengers recently, the new Infinity War Avengers movie, and it was off the chain, also known as off the cheese, however you want to say that. But I thought it was awesome, so I thought, wow, you know what? I would like to talk about, in this, what is the difference, the similarities and the differences between God and Thanos. Now, you may initially think of comparing and contrasting God and Thanos as a no contest. After all, how can someone match up the very real creator of the universe with a fictional character that we find in a Marvel movie, and someone who is considered a villain at that? Let me be clear about something. I don't believe that God is a villain, but you may be surprised just how similar the God that we see in the scriptures is with Thanos from the new Avengers movie, Infinity War. And bam! Just like that, I have two kinds of audiences. One, people who are eager to compare God to fictional characters because they think God is a fictional character. And two, the religious type that are listening eagerly to see if I commit blasphemy. Now, before you write me off as a heretic, I want to make it known that yes, I believe there are similarities, but as we dig deep into those similarities, we will find small tweaks and differences between how these similar characteristics play out, and these small tweaks make all the difference in the world. So, first of all, I want to start off by just giving a quick critique of the movie from my perspective. Did I like it? Did I hate it? And I gotta tell you, it was a brilliant movie. It was absolutely wonderful. I enjoyed every moment of it. To be honest with you, there was a lot of comedy. I was laughing my butt off like the whole time, all the way up until the end, when it switched from being hilarious into kind of a doom and gloom sort of event. But that I also thought was good. Now, I want to say, first and foremost, that there will be spoilers in this podcast. So if you have not seen the movie yet, first of all, shame on you. It's been almost 2 weeks, so how have you not seen it yet? There's been 2 Discount Tuesdays since it's been released. So, the very next Discount Tuesday, go get a ticket, go see it. It is a great movie. You'll have a great time. I know you will. It's going to blow your mind. One critique that I did have about it that I thought was kind of interesting is, it almost seemed like Thanos was the main character in the movie. Obviously, it's an Avengers movie, so there's tons and tons of characters, tons of characters who have had their own movies and who have been main characters in their own movies. And so what are you going to do when you got one villain who matches up all these heroes against this one villain? Well, then it kind of becomes, the common denominator is that one villain, therefore they become kind of, in a way, the main character. But what I found was really interesting is how they humanized Thanos. You watch the movie and you kind of think, maybe he's not such a bad guy. And that's kind of the tricky thing about it. I know that a lot of, that's been pretty common actually nowadays in movies, in the Avengers movies, in superhero movies, especially in the new Marvel shows put on by Netflix, how there's this dark side to heroes and there's this human side to villains. And I think that is one of the biggest differences between movies nowadays and shows nowadays and comics way back when. Because when comics were created, originally, it was during a more modern time, now are in a postmodern time, where we are contradicting or we're swinging the pendulum the other way than modernism did swing it. Essentially, where modernism thought it had its strength was that basically we had this concrete progression of society, and we had this concrete, absolute morality about us. So when when Stan Lee and some of the other people wrote their comics and drew their comics up, the heroes were objectively good and the villains were objectively evil, and they were portrayed as such. But nowadays, the lines between good and evil are very, very blurred, and that's exactly what I have seen in Infinity War. With Thanos being humanized, and with especially like in Civil War in the past Avengers movie, how some of them were, they had all these dark sides, that all the heroes were at war against each other. That's the whole point of a civil war, right? That they were at war against each other. But I thought it was interesting because the old comics, sure, they would they would show flaws of superheroes, sure. But that is completely different where nowadays, a lot of the stuff that we see heroes having destructive behavior. It's more than just flaws. It goes beyond flaws into destructive behavior. And we see villains have these like phenomenal hearts where you're like, oh my gosh, this person's so good. And, that's why nowadays we hold Darth Vader up on a pedestal, and now we hold Thanos up on a pedestal because we think they're so good in some way. And I know that Darth Vader was portrayed as good, even way before. It was really popular to portray villains as good, but it still kind of fits into that category. Now, with that being said, the idea of Thanos being humanized, I want to get into the similarities and differences between Thanos and God. And the first one that I think is really remarkable is this idea of emotion, right? Because people typically think of villains to not have much emotional range. Like they just kind of one thing, if they do have any emotional range at all, they're either happy causing destruction or they're filled with anger. Villains typically aren't fearful, although they can be fueled by fear. They're not typically sadness unless that sadness turns into anger, which causes them to step into destructive behavior. Or they're just really oddly happy by making people's lives a living hell. Now, here's the interesting thing. People don't think of villains to have huge emotional range. People don't really think of God to have huge emotional range either. They think that he's just like some guy up in the sky. He set the world in motion, set the laws of physics in place, and then just said, okay, the world's spinning. Now go, do your thing. And I don't have to be involved. I don't have much emotional range. But the crazy thing is that God and Thanos, in this regard, are actually very similar. The movie actually paints Thanos to have this incredible emotional range where he's attached to, his daughter, who he adopted, after he killed everybody on her planet. And he's completely attached to Gamora, and he even sheds tears. And like I said, there's going to be spoilers, so he ends up sacrificing her, and he didn't want to sacrifice her, but it shows him crying. He's got this interesting attachment to his daughter Gamora. But the scriptures also paint God as a picture, as having this huge emotional range. So here you have Thanos who could get angry, and he could be happy, and he could be sad, and he could, I don't know how afraid he is necessarily, but I think that is possible. I was thinking of when they were pulling his gauntlet off, he seemed kind of startled by that. But anyways, the point is he has a large emotional range. So does God. We see him in the scriptures. He's wanting to wipe the Israelites out, right? Because here he is. He saved the Israelites from a horrible nation, being Egypt, and he's leading them out of slavery. And here they are completely rebelling against him. And he was telling Moses, he was like, I'm about to wipe these fools out. And what did Moses do? Moses appealed to God's character, and Moses said, God, please don't wipe out your people. That would also not make you look good among the other nations. They would say, oh, well, I guess you didn't actually make any progress in freeing a people from slavery. And he appeals to God. And God, what does God do? God does not wipe them out. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a huge emotional range. We see God moved by anger. It doesn't mean that he acts on his anger, but he has anger. He is, for lack of better terms, in a way humanized. But really, I think that it's really the opposite, actually, because God is that way, then that's why we are the way we are with our emotions. But God also gets sad. God is filled with joy. God has a huge emotional range. God is moved by compassion on a continual basis for his children, for the nation of Israel. And he is an emotional being. Now, more on their similarities here about in the realm of emotions is that both of their emotions between Thanos and God do not go unchecked. Meaning, I just talked about the instance where God wanted to wipe the Israelites out because they were rebelling against him, which, could you blame him? I couldn't. I know I'd want to do the same thing. But the point is that he didn't. So his emotions do not go unchecked. Both have surprisingly good boundaries for their emotions and do not allow their emotions to control their actions. They could be fully emotional beings while still not being completely controlled by their emotions. Now, I do hesitate to say they can have control of their emotions. I don't believe that people have control of our emotions. Our emotions just are. Therefore, our emotions aren't necessarily good or bad. They just exist and they happen. Emotions happen. But there's a difference between people who act out of an outflow of emotion, or people who act because of their emotions and let their emotions control their actions, and people who are able to express their emotions but don't allow it to control their actions and every little thing that they do. So in that regard, God and Thanos are similar. God has checked his emotions. Thanos, when he had complete attachment to Gamora, he still saw, you know what? I need to sacrifice her in order to progress with my goal and my vision. So he threw her overboard and she died. There's your spoiler. And he, was able to keep in sight what seemed logical in his mind, despite what he was feeling. Here's the biggest difference between Thanos and God in the realm of emotion. And it's this: compassion. While you think that Thanos has compassion for Gamora, he does not. The only thing that Thanos has for Gamora is attachment, which is much different than compassion. A huge difference there, too, is that while Thanos has emotional attachment to only one person, God's emotions are compassionately invested into each and every person in the entire world. Now, not everybody goes into relationship with God, but that doesn't mean that he's not emotionally invested into your life. And I say you, because whether you, who are listening to this right now, believe in God or not, he actually cares about you a great deal. I can say that with confidence. I can say that with authority. He cares about you. He's invested in you. He loves you more than anything in the world. Now, this leads me into my next similarity between God and Thanos. God sacrificed the only son that was fully in his likeness, also known as his only begotten. For instance, let's say, for example, when you beget something, it has the same exact nature as you. My wife is pregnant, let's say, for example. When she gives birth to our daughter, who is going to be coming in a couple months, our daughter is going to be a human that is in the same likeness as us, that is in nature, the same species as us. Now, begetting something and creating something are two completely different things. We as human beings cannot create another living being. We beget another human being. The only thing I can create is, let's say, for example, a podcast or a chair or what you fill in the blank, some inanimate object. God can actually create human beings, but that which he begets is at a whole nother level. So the only begotten Son of God, which is Jesus, God completely sacrifices him for what? For the greater good, right? Now, this is kind of like Thanos. Some of you people who are looking out for a heretic are having a heyday right now. Oh boy, Thanos and God, really. Likewise, Thanos sacrificed Gamora for the sake of the greater good, at least what he thought was the greater good, so he could get, what? The Soul Stone, which he needed to set the world right. Now, there are striking similarities between God and Jesus with Thanos and Gamora in this idea of sacrifice. But here's the major difference. The immediate reason Thanos sacrificed Gamora is so he could become more powerful from getting the Soul Stone. Did God sacrifice Jesus in order to become more powerful? No, not at all. In fact, God's power doesn't grow or shrink. He is already infinitely powerful and needs nothing to augment his power. Here's what's crazy. Jesus' sacrifice probably did the opposite of empower God. In fact, with a simple Christian theology, we can consider Jesus as in nature fully God. By submitting himself to the cross, he brought himself to the most humble and vulnerable place he could possibly go. So while Thanos was attached to Gamora and tossing her overboard did make him shed some tears, he was really doing it to make himself more powerful. For God, the intention was the stark opposite, not to empower himself, but rather to empower everybody in the entire world to go into right relationship with God, each other, and the world around them. Here's where I lead into my last similarity and difference. Thanos and God are both selflessly driven by an end goal in mind. While Thanos was striving to make himself more powerful, it was actually for selfless reasons. In fact, it was reason that led Thanos to the conclusion that he came to. His conclusion was this: that destruction of lives and planets would lead to balance so that all of the resources in the universe were not spread too thin. The intention behind it was so everyone would be able to live well-balanced lives. In fact, one of the things that he has mentioned a couple times in the movie, as you will see, is he basically just, I hate hungry children. He doesn't say it like that, but he hates the fact that children go hungry. So what does he do? He kills them. And he has just solved the problem of world hunger by killing a bunch of people. So he seems kind of like a good guy, right? So here's the part that people won't like when I talk about God, when it comes to destruction and all that. What if God also has destruction in mind, like Thanos, in order to bring peace to the earth? See, now I am on shaky ground, so I need you to listen very, very carefully to what I am going to say next. And might I start this subject by first in humility letting you know that I believe that I have unholy qualities and characteristics still attached to my person. I don't become perfect. I don't become some holier than thou person when I start to follow Jesus. Also, I believe that when Jesus returns to set earth right, that God will burn up every unholy thing that is attached to me, and it might hurt quite bad. I believe everyone could go through a similar experience. The more unholiness that we have already shed, the less it may hurt. I could be wrong about this. But the difference in what people experience when this happens is this: whether or not you have been impregnated with the seed of holiness by the power of the Holy Spirit through faith in Jesus. To become a Christian does not mean to become perfect or even religious. Rather, it means to have a seed of goodness planted in you, then letting that seed grow into something more. If a person has not allowed this seed to be planted, then there will be no part of that person to remain when God does away with all unholy things in order to set the world right. Now, once again, I hope you're still with me. I hope you're still listening carefully. I need to be extremely clear about something when discussing the end of all things. I believe that the burning up of all unholy things will be a one-time event led by the only worthy judge, that is God. And that outside of this one-time event, we have already been ushered into an age where destruction is not in the cards for those who seek to follow God's ways. That Jesus ushered us into an age of looking to create and build the world in goodness rather than destroy. Also, that after this one destruction event, the destruction itself will be destroyed and will no longer exist. So that the entire concept of destruction will be destroyed and there will only be creation and goodness. Try to wrap your brains around that. Now, here's the biggest difference between Thanos' end goal and God's end goal. And once again, this is where you may see that this is actually making it look even more so that God's ways are good and Thanos is not so much. Thanos seeks to bring balance. God seeks to bring full restoration, perfection, and completed goodness. Here's what is interesting about balance. First of all, it includes order and chaos. It is a very Eastern mindset. Order and chaos are the two sides of a yin-yang, after all. That somehow, through order and chaos, the balance of the universe is satisfied. But with chaos, there is still badness in the world. God's destruction is not to bring balance. It is to burn up all badness so that there is nothing bad left. With balance, there needs to be constant maintenance. At the end of the movie Infinity War, it says that Thanos will return. Of course he will. Why? Because his job of continuing to destroy is not done. Thanos says in the movie that by wiping people out painlessly, with having them cease to exist, that he is being merciful. However, the act of balance isn't merciful at all. With the act of balance destroying for the sake of balance is still a reality. Then some form of badness still exists, and everyone that is left alive is grieving and angry because many of their friends and family are dead. This sounds kind of like a crappy existence for people who are left alive in Thanos' world, if you ask me. Now, with God's end goal, there will be no more need for balance at all. The scales will be fully tipped into just pure 100% goodness. Everything will be perfect. It will be better than balanced. There will be no more death, no more sadness, no more fear, no more dysfunction or looming threat of destruction. All of the most difficult parts of the human drama will be done with, and we will live in completed harmony forever. So, in conclusion, just want to list them off here real quick. Here are the similarities and difference. Number 1, God and Thanos both have seemingly humanized emotional range, but God's compassion is infinitely present for every living individual. Number 2, God and Thanos both make a sacrifice for the sake of their version of the greater good, but by doing so, Thanos empowered himself while God empowered everyone else. And number 3, God and Thanos both have an end goal of world peace, but Thanos' end goal is the illusion of balance, while God's is the completed goodness of the human project. So while villains are humanized and heroes are vilified in our current day and age, don't be duped by thinking that destructive behavior is somehow justified. This brings us back to the overarching philosophy that revolutionology is built off of. That if you want to create change, it starts with revolution and leans either towards rebellion or towards revival. That if you take part in rebellion, it is doing the opposite of pressing forward towards the greater good. So with every decision that you make, look at it through this lens. Is this for the betterment of the world we live in, and is it void of destructive behavior? Destructive behavior has no place among revolutionary followers of Jesus who want to lean towards revival. This kind of gets us into the idea, are people good or bad, right? So we have come to an age where we don't believe that people are fully good or fully bad. And I'll say too that I believe that everyone probably has at least a little good and at least a little bad. But we have lost a clear idea of good people and bad people. And I'm not saying that if you don't follow Jesus, then you're a bad person. Absolutely not. What I want to say, I feel like for me, the clear idea of somebody that is bad is somebody that causes destruction, that causes harm, whether they're causing harm to themselves or to others. That is kind of in the way the definition of someone who could be bad. And so I want to encourage you as a revolutionary to go out there, to know, to have this idea, to have a concrete idea of what is good, what is bad, so that your revolutionary, can either lean towards rebellion or revival, hopefully towards revival, to the betterment of the world, to the betterment of society. So with that being said, go revolutionary and make your community a better place. Thank you for tuning in on the Revolutionology Podcast, a podcast for revolutionaries by revolutionaries to help you build your worldview and plan your action. Today for me was more for fun. I hope you enjoyed it too, and we'll see you next time.